Not sure whether Matthew's gospel would pass union rules if there were unions back in the time of Christ. Of course, there weren't. There were mean landowners, vicious landowners, and from time to time, generous landowners like we have here. Perhaps they were not the majority, but they were well known, of course, and popular. Anyone who treats others well, particularly when they might not exactly deserve it, gets his or her name known far and wide, as do those who are mean and abusive. The typical person in Jesus' time, in the days which these Gospels are written, may have experienced a landowner who would not pay at all, or who would cut your wages, or whoever it might be, something other than the generosity we hear in the Gospel. That's why the parable is such a lovely teaching tool, because it speaks not always of the world that is, but of the world that ought to be. That's what the kingdom of heaven is. Kingdom of this world is the way things are. Some places they're better than others. Sometimes they're better than others. Some always have better lives than others. It could be us one day who suffer like those whom the whose lands the hurricanes have ruined lately and knocked their homes down and all. Maybe once it was or will be, who knows. We celebrate the glory of the goodness we are given, care for those who are the victims of the world or each other, the badness that humans do, and the trials and tribulations that come to life no matter how. That is how we live in the world and ought to. The kingdom of heaven is different. Kingdom of heaven is like a place where everybody gets enough to eat, even if they didn't manage to find enough work that day to earn it. The kingdom of heaven is a place where God's grace flows, even, perhaps especially, when we least deserve it, where God's love shines the brighter, the darker the place is in which it is needed. The world we live in is a world of competition. Often, a world where the games we are forced to play to survive are set up as zero-sum games, like a big pie, where if I get more of that pie, means you get less, and vice versa. If you find a way to take more of the pie, it means I get less. And if you're the laborers and I'm the owner of the vineyard, one of us is going to lose if the other wins. That's the way the kingdom of the world seems to have set itself up far too often, far too many places. Kingdom of heaven is different. There always seems to be more. The games don't just have a zero sum where one only can win if others lose. Like the best of those worlds where when I win, you win too, and we all rise together. Rising tide that lifts all boats, but not too high lest we flood the land. Kingdom of heaven is like that. Each gets enough, and sometimes more than enough. All of God's love that we can imagine, and all of the love we can't imagine, that exceeds the dreams we would have. That's there too. The glory of the power of God being that much bigger and greater than we are and can even ask or imagine is like that. One of the closest things Jesus could find to compare it to was a crazy landowner who would give to anyone who worked in his field a full day's wage no matter what they did. No matter how close to the end of our lives we find ourselves finally opening our hearts and our minds to the power of God made real in Christ, or however it's made real to us in our lives, we get the full measure of his glory and grace, even yea, until it overflows. You might have realized this when you were small. You might see people live their whole lives never figuring it out. And only by the time they walk with 3 legs, 2 legs and a cane and all, all of a sudden, they finally figured out that God is a God of love and grace, and they can let go the bitterness and anger or selfishness that ruled their lives. And they get just as much grace as you and just as much as me. More than we can imagine, all we'll need and beyond. And the early church wrote the Gospels down. Some of them weren't too sure that was fair. That's why this parable becomes so resonant for Matthew's community and the others. Because they had to remember that Jesus reminded them at the very beginning that this isn't a contest to see who gets saved first or who gets saved most. This isn't a race to see who's going to get to the altar or the cross first. We all come to the altar when the cross comes to us. We each have ours to bear, and the one who died and rose for us gave that life abundantly. It's not a test to see who's going to get the most Jesus points and get the gold star of heaven. Everybody wins as long as we realize that in Christ we've always already won. I know you stand firm with me in one spirit, says the apostle to the Philippians, striving side by side with one mind for the faith of the gospel. And your foes do not intimidate you, though they might, they do not. I am convinced of this, he says. I know I will stay with you while you grow and while you are full of the joy of faith, so I may share abundantly as you boast of Christ. Paul sees it. Paul knows it. The more we grow in the Lord, the bigger that pie gets that all can share. The more we grow in the love of Christ, the more that love is ours to give away to all who need it. God's grace was great to those who really, literally hungered in the wilderness and worried that they had made a terrible choice in following Moses and Aaron and Miriam and the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud out from the land of slavery. They worried that they would not have what they need when they realized they were in a desert place, a place that was empty of what they needed to live. They did not know what there would be. And as people do when they get hungry, they whined. They complained. Ever have children that are hungry and they all but whining all over the place? Took me about 5 years of parenting. Took my wife 5 minutes. Took me 5 years to figure out that the solution to the whining child was to feed it, not to try to stop it whining. Apparently the Lord and Moses figured this out many thousands of years ago, because that was exactly what he said. I will rain bread from heaven on these people, and I'll send birds too, which he did. And there's a lesson in that for us as well. When we find we're in need and we're honest about it, it may be that the Lord will find a way to give us exactly what we need, and more besides. More besides. There's usually things we have to do. You had to go pick the manna off the little plants that it grew on, and had to go get the quail and wring their necks and turn them into whatever quail turns into when you try to cook it. So it wasn't as though they had no responsibility or task to do with their abundance. But they had the abundance almost the moment they asked for it. Just like the workers in the vineyard had their abundance, but not until they'd finished the labor they'd agreed to do. We do what the Lord tasks us to do, and His abundance is there at the end, and His grace is there while we do it, though we may not see it at the time. We may not feel it. But in the end, when we rest, when we reflect, when evening comes and the day is past, we can look back on what was and say, yes, the Lord's blessings were with me. And if I needed quail, there were quail. If I needed manna, there was manna. If I needed money, there was enough. If I needed somebody to show me I was loved and mattered, that was there too. And if I needed to be challenged to be useful to another in need, the Lord gave me that grace as well. And lo, I could serve, though I did not know at the time it was the Lord who served through me and gave me that strength and blessed me with that grace. May the Lord bless us all with that kind of grace. May we never be anxious of earthly things, but love things heavenly and shine those heavenly things into the world Christ died to save and rose to set free. Amen.